Lately, it seems every passing second brings news of another climate-driven disaster. But we still have the power to turn back the clock. Harnessing the power of collective human energy, today's university students are working together to chart a new future, demanding and creating the solutions for a sustainable climate. Our focus in science, engineering, activism, and politics offers the potential of a better tomorrow for all of us. Tune in to Campus Climate Corps for news of what is and what is not happening at this year's UN Climate Conference. Prepare for a livable tomorrow with a life and career of action. Join us and become part of the solution.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to COP or Campus Climate Corps' Day 7 daily briefing. Wow, it's been a full week since Campus Climate Corps, since we began streaming our Campus Climate Corps material. We're so glad to have each and every one of you along here for the journey. Thank you so much for all the emails you've been sending us, all the comments, all the suggestions. We really do appreciate it. Without further ado, we're going to get started here. As many of you might have tuned in to see over the news, you know that the U.S. delegation at COP27 is the largest it's been in a very long time. We have everyone from Joe Biden attending today. We had yesterday and today Nancy Pelosi speaking, a lot of those on the Climate Change Caucus or the Climate Caucus in Washington attending today. We have some good and some bad to report. Both on folks like, the good, like, Senator or Representative Castor and Pelosi, and some of the bad, which you'll probably hear from us as well. So without further ado, we have a couple of different presentations we're going to do for y'all today. One of them being one of our very own Esteban and Michal Fidler. They have prepared some presentations and photos to share. So without further ado, we're going to showcase what they have to offer. One second, folks. John, you want to maybe give it a little bit of commentary on what you've seen today so far while I get the slides up?
Well, as you mentioned, today was Decarbonization Day, but it actually seemed more like the USA Day. There was practically a blitz of American high-level officials here at COP. We've had John Kerry here all week doing speeches. We had Pelosi arrived yesterday with and did her talk, which I think you're going to show later on, with Kathy Castor and Delaney from Oregon. Both Castor is the chair of the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis, and Delaney, I think she's on the Science and Technology Committee. So two persons very much involved in climate activities in Congress. And then there were a total of 14 Democratic members of Congress here as part of the Pelosi delegation, and then 5 Republican members of Congress, 4 of which presented in a session at the U.S. Senate today that we'll talk more about later.
Absolutely. Well, in the meantime, we do have some photos that will showcase from today's COP27 event, and then we'll get directly into that content in just a moment.
I started my today's trip to COP on a bus, and I saw that the roads were very empty. I wasn't really sure what was going on, and then I realized it's Friday, so that's when the weekend starts here. I saw a flow of cars coming out of a mosque. Decided to go there and have a look. And because I came after the praying time already, the mosque was basically empty. So I had some time to walk around, look around, and get a feeling to slow down a bit and get a glimpse of the mosque, which is very close to COP. Then I went out of the mosque and was thinking what to do next, whether just walk somewhere or go to COP. When I look towards west, that's what I saw from the mosque. When I look towards east, that's what I saw from the mosque. And this would be the third site, and this would be the fourth site. So the decision was I'll need to go to COP because there is desert everywhere on all sides only. I walked towards COP. Maybe after a kilometer or so, I saw these two buildings or structures. Saw them from a bus previously, just wasn't sure what they are. And today I get a chance to step in. It's the Saudi Green Initiative. It's not within the COP premises, it's outside, but it's very nice. There are some exhibitions there. This would be hydrogen vehicles, for example. And there was also free food, but as soon as I got closer to the free food, then it turns out that having just the press badge is not enough to get the free food, so I was sent away. Then I walked towards the COP, the main venue, on these wide boulevards in a very nice setting, I would say, very nice setting, although not everything is as beautiful as it might seem. And once I got to COP, this was what I saw. There was a small demonstration, again maybe 20-30 people demonstrating. This time it was against militarization. So the slogans today were demilitarize, decarbonize. It was also free Palestine and so on, but nothing major. Today's date, the theme of the day was decarbonization. So here would be the program that the US Center had today. And then I started walking through the various conference rooms. I had my camera on me, started to take photos, and I was approached by a UN lady who told me that their official photographer didn't show up and asked me if I would be willing to take some photos officially for them. So I eagerly agreed and started to take photos like this. And that it turned out the official photographer was just late. He showed up, so I didn't get the job, unfortunately. So I'll need to stick with my Florida Media Group badge, not the official UN badge. Then I walked to some of the pavilions. Here was a scientist from NASA delivering his talk about free open data, about coral reefs monitoring from space, and they were also offering some internships, or were referring that the internships were done. Very interesting, very scientific. One issue I noticed at COP is the acoustic, because there are so many presentations going on at the same time. Some of the pavilions are pretty small and crowded, so the acoustic is not always that great. This would be a way how, for example, Scotland solved the issue. Everybody gets the set of headset and can hear very properly, and this pavilion is very quiet because everybody has the sound in the headsets. One shot from the Qatar pavilion, because that's where the FIFA World Cup is starting, I believe next week or the week after. So they have on display all the stadiums that the World Cup will take place at. Some of the pavilions are very modern. I am impressed how much work was invested in the pavilions. Then I walked through various rooms, plenary rooms, and what was talked about today mostly was the decarbonization, the role of industry and so on. And there were many very important people here as well. I saw the CEO of the Puma, because one of the talks today was related to the fashion industry. Here would be a CEO of Total Energies as well. So plenty of important people in town. This would be an image from a press conference. Unfortunately, only one journalist showed there. This would be probably the last shot of the day when I ended up in the media center or the press center where I prepare these daily talks. So here I have a nice view on screen of all the important things going on. And actually, final photo of the day, when I was about to start recording my today's show, the fella on the TV started to talk, so he was disturbing me quite a lot. So I had to wait until he was done with his speech. But I'm sure you will hear about this gentleman more today. And with that being said, I'm turning it back to you.
Thanks a lot, Michael. We always appreciate your insight, your photography, and your ability to get other people to ask you to take photos of them. I'm sure you do an excellent job. All right, that being said, I think we left off on a really good note, segueing directly into the big shots who showed up today for COP, including those of the Biden administration and Nancy Pelosi and the rest of the Climate Caucus. John, maybe we can talk a little bit about your experiences, what you might have seen over there right now. I mean, I noticed, I listened to Pelosi's press conference, and I did take some notes on some of the things that she had highlighted, but maybe you'd like to talk or chat just a little bit right now about your thoughts and your experiences there.
So, as I mentioned, that just about everybody seemed to be showing up here from the USA today. Pelosi, did her press conference. She did her speech yesterday, and then Valholly is at a reception right now that Kathy Castor is going to be speaking at, and we'll need to go to Valholly as soon as she's ready to show her Delaney video. So let me know when she's ready on that, so that she can then go interview Kathy Castor.
Absolutely. Valholly, if you want to showcase the interview you have.
Yeah, of course. I just got it all settled. I was with a group of people at a table, all just trying to eat some dinner, so I had to move around. Here with Delaney Reynolds. You might remember her from Wednesday, and unfortunately she won't be able to join us for our live stream tonight because it is her last day and you have one last session you got to get to. You know how it is. And so I was just going to do a little interview now and talk about what she experienced at COP. So let's get right into it. How many days have you been here?
So I've been here since Sunday, so about 6 days. And like Valholly said, this is my last day, unfortunately. I wish I could be here both weeks, but school calls.
And why did you attend this year?
So I'm attending this year through the University of Miami. As you may remember me mentioning on Wednesday, I'm a dual PhD and law student through their ABBA Center for Ecosystem Science and Policy, and their environmental law program was kind enough to select me and send me with a group of 5 other students. So we've been here checking it out, being part of the discussion, and also following specific topics. Additionally, I'm a climate activist, so I have been following COP for many years. And so I've always wanted to attend, and this is a great opportunity that I got to come through UM, and hopefully I can find ways to attend again in the future.
I hope you do, and I hope I do, and we can have infinite interviews.
So many interviews.
Oh my. All right, so this is the first year where there's been a children and youth pavilion. And it's been a lot of talk about youth, and we're our constituency, and apparently we're this big presence that is highly represented at this conference. What are your thoughts on that?
I'd say we're decently represented. There is a lot of youth here, which is very exciting. And to have a youth pavilion for the first time ever is a step in the right direction. We're definitely being included in the conversation, which is key. And I especially have loved being able to learn from youth in other countries and how their government interacts with them. I learned the other day that the United Arab Emirates actually has a youth council in every single branch of their government, because the way that they see their government is they're working for their future rather than for the present, which I thought was amazing and is an ideal we should implement everywhere. I mean, that's truly fantastic. So yeah, I think we're represented well. and we're starting to become part of the discussion. Of course, there's room for improvement, but there always is.
And what about overall youth participation? What have you seen from the young people around here, and what's it been like?
It's been amazing, honestly. Everyone that I've spoken to has been very knowledgeable about the topic. We had a whole youth pavilion. Of course we did. But it's always full, is what I meant to say. Constantly kids in there doing work, having discussions, or events. There's a lot of talks there, so it's really engaging. And I've really enjoyed it. Yesterday, Thursday, the theme of the day was youth, activism, and involvement. So a lot of the pavilions, for example, we're in front of China, so this is what a pavilion looks like for their country. A lot of pavilions had events specifically about youth involvement with climate change yesterday, which was really great to see. I attended quite a few at the US Center, at the Resilience Hub, at a bunch of different pavilions. So that was really encouraging. And again, just a small step in the right direction. Still a lot of improvement to be made. Still a lot of ways that youth could be brought into the discussion. But I think we're on the right track.
And as a youth yourself, what have you been doing around here? What have you been attending, and what have you learned?
So I am actually following climate finance and a very specific part of it. So I have been following the Global Environment Facility and the Global Climate Fund, and also known as the GEF and the GCF. There's a lot of acronyms here. But what I've been following is, so the GEF program is wrapping up these technological needs assessments in a lot of developed countries. And they're looking to close the program, these developed countries. Developing countries don't want that because they haven't gotten to be a part of it yet. So they're kind of discussing how they can bring developing countries into the mix, give them the opportunity to be part of GEF, to be included in these TNAs, and that way they can use these funds to implement different solutions for climate change depending on their needs, which is what they report in the technical needs assessment, the TNA. So based on that, they can, get the proper solutions based on this big funding pot in the Global Environment Facility. So it's been fascinating. The reason that I can't be here live with you guys tonight is because they have their closing session at the same time. And I'm writing a big law review on the topic, so I gotta make sure I know what's going on.
That sounds amazing. Thank you so much for the information. And from what you've experienced, do you think anything truly meaningful comes out of these discussions and these international level conversations?
I think that sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. The specific topic that I'm following, they've made a lot of progress. Countries like Uganda, Kenya, Ethiopia, Philippines, they're all seeing this progression where instead of the United States and Canada and the European Union wanting to close this program, now they're open to it. And they're like, all right, fine, you can have some of the funds. you can be part of this program. So that is definitely a progression. And then they can move on to other agenda items. On other topics, not so much. Food security, it's not making much traction. It's not really moving forward. But it's interesting to see how it differs on different topics. And it's really interesting to be able to listen in to the things that they're talking about and what the basis of the debate actually is, rather than read the summary report after of what the decision was, because you kind of get to understand why they're deciding these things and how they came to that conclusion. So I've enjoyed it.
I'm glad you got to experience that finally, instead of just reading an article about how slow things were. And I hope you get to come back. And Thanks. One final thing, I'd just like to hear a comparison of what it's like here and what these moves are compared to our years of legal and political action over in Florida, and you specifically with your own organization there and so involved there. What's it like?
So the key word is years. It's a long process. That's why there's been so many COPs and it's been slow moving. Paris Agreement didn't get implemented until 2015, just a few years ago. That's not that long ago. And we're still trying to make progress. Same thing with the lawsuit. It took us 3 years to get our first hearing. Politics is a long process. I've learned that time and time again. But we're still here. We're sticking around. Youth are still part of the discussion. we still want to be part of the discussion because we know that we don't have another choice. Like, it's either be part of the discussion, be part of the solution, push for solutions relentlessly, or we're going to lose special places that we love all over the planet. Whether it's here in Egypt, we have the Red Sea that is beautiful. It's got coral reefs and different fish species. Of course, it's at risk of bleaching. Obviously, Miami and Florida, we got sea level rise and hurricanes and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's everywhere. It's going to be a global effort. What's the slogan for this year? Together? I forgot. But anyways, the slogan for this year has something to do with together, and that's how we're going to solve the climate change crisis together. Everyone working in conjunction. And yeah, it's going to take a while, but I think we're going to get there.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, a few hours ahead of time. And we'll hear from you again. And hopefully next year we'll have a little bit more information, and keep an eye out for that law review and look at what's happening with Miami sea rise. And we'll hopefully talk to you again soon. Thank you for being on, Delaney.
Thanks for having me. Bye, everyone.
Well, thanks a lot, Valholly. I think that was a wonderful interview between you and Delaney, and really does showcase, the power that youth is increasingly getting at these COP27 conferences. So I know you have an interview that you're going to go get. So I'm going to wish you the best of luck on that one. Go get him.
Thank you so much.
Valholly, Valholly, is it all set up? Are you going to be able to get the interview, you think?
I hope so. It's a smaller event than I assumed, but the time is coming up. So hopefully I'll be able to find her and figure it out.
Okay, great. Looking forward to it.
Best of luck, Valholly.
Thank you for joining, everyone. See you guys tomorrow.
Yeah, be sure to tune in tomorrow. I'm sure she's going to have some excellent content that she's going to go get for you right now. Anyway, we can talk just a little bit more, I think, about Nancy Pelosi's discussions and her contributions to COP27. John, I know we had some boots on the ground for that interview. What are your thoughts so far?
Well, the speeches she's been giving have been interesting in that they basically highlight some of the legislative accomplishments, particularly the Inflation Reduction Act and the funding that is allocated there to deal with the climate change. But I think you had a chance to watch her press conference this morning by video.
I certainly did. I was struck remarkably how Americo-centric her discussion and her topic was. To anyone who was not a U.S. citizen, you may never have known that this was a COP27 discussion, mainly because her ideas were circulating almost exclusively around the Inflation Reduction Act and how much of a significant difference it is for Americans and for the average voter to see what the accomplishments of the Democrats truly are in this respect. And she'd also brought up the ideas that, healthcare and security and Social Security were big parts of the Inflation Reduction Act. Again, to anyone who was at COP27 from a different country who attended that briefing and that interview, I don't know that they would have fully either understood or comprehended or have been the audience that Nancy Pelosi and the rest of the Climate Caucus was trying to appeal to. This was definitely something that an average American voter would have watched and understood and appreciated, or not appreciated, depending on who you talk to. But for an international conference dealing with climate change, it really didn't speak to that level or to that respect. So Representative Kasser got up on the stage and she talked about how there were many champions, all of everyone else from the Climate Caucus who had attended. They were all champions pushing forward the Inflation Reduction Act, how originally this was the Climate Crisis Action Plan, and then that eventually evolved into the Inflation Reduction Act. Then they took some time to attack Putin, took some time to address the methane pollution and America's commitment to the United States commitment to reducing their methane pollution by 30% by 2030. And then the rest of the committee also gave their speeches on their appreciation for the other members and such. So I definitely thought that this conference belonged inside of Washington. It didn't belong inside COP27. There was no attempts to talk about, cooperation with America's allies overseas. So, for example, the United Kingdom or France, or cooperation among scientists between those countries, which happens quite frequently and often. I didn't see any of that content in Nancy Pelosi's speech. Again, this was a speech for the American voter and not for an audience at COP27 who was a very international background and basis. What were your thoughts, from your perspective?
Well, I agree with you that it was very U.S. centric, but you have to understand that the global audience has been waiting like, okay, when is the U.S. going to start to address this issue within their own nation and begin to make progress towards emission reductions? So they've been waiting for us to engage fully. And this was an opportunity for the administration, for Pelosi to underscore what has been done by Congress along these lines. So I think that the global community will appreciate the action that she outlined, particularly since, it was just a couple of years ago that we didn't have a presence at a pavilion at all there in COP. But the administration change has revitalized our engagement here. So, but Biden's speech was different. Biden's speech was very much geared toward an international audience. He started out first with a sort of a U.S. Perspective, talking about Veterans Day, how today is Veterans Day, and he recognized John Kerry, the U.S. climate envoy, for his service and decorations. I think he had earned a Silver Star and a Bronze Star during his military service. So he started out in that context. And interestingly, at a couple of points during his speech, he got heckled, but heckled from a positive perspective. I mean, people were giving whoops and cheers and attaboys to Biden. And at the end of his speech, there was an amazing degree of applause for him. And some of that may be simply for the fact of being there and having the U.S. there and having survived the midterm elections somewhat intact. Mm-hmm. So the House was clearly in support of Biden. He made a few missteps in his talk, a few stumbles here and there, but long plane trip, we can all identify with that, right? So he talked about, you mentioned the methane. He spent some time talking about the methane, which is described. Let me see if I can share screen here a little bit.
Yeah, I know methane has been a very large discussion point recently, especially after last year's COP26 pledges.
Yeah, so Biden was standing tall and proud, and he also talked about the first legislation that he ever offered on climate change, 1986. So 36 years ago, he unsuccessfully offered his first piece of legislation to address climate change. So that sort of puts it in perspective. He received cheers, but it was basically cheers from the international audience. Finally, the U.S. is engaged to a certain extent, maybe 36 years after it should have begun. But we got to do all we can now. And he outlined what the White House, what his administration was doing on this front. And his comments closely paralleled an announcement that was released on the White House webpage. And you can go visit it there and read all the details. This morning, there were two of them. They split them in half. One announcement was regarding his comments or his various initiatives that he was going to discuss here in Egypt. And the other one was focused pretty much exclusively on methane. But this announcement that's up now kind of combines the two. One of the things he talked about, like Nancy Pelosi, was the Inflation Reduction Act. He talked about the Infrastructure Act and some of the climate measures in it. And then he talked about the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol. And honestly, I'm going to have to look that one up to fully understand what that's about. He spent a lot of time focused on Africa and the Pacific Islands and some of the contributions the USA is going to make to some of those funds. he was talking about 100 million here, 150 million there. But when you compare that to the Inflation Reduction Act of, $36 billion a year, the orders of magnitude are hugely different. So there's a lot of room for improvement on the U.S. front with these relief measures for adaptation and dealing with the climate crises in the developing nations. But to his credit, he talked about the funds that are being provided to both Africa and the Pacific Islands. He also talked about how he is implementing a requirement for all U.S. agencies to report their progress towards the emission reduction goals set by the administration. And then he went into the methane, and he talked about the EPA rules. The EPA is going to be implementing rules that try to get a handle on these methane emissions from the oil and gas industry. And previously, the inspections only applied to the large facilities, but now EPA is extending that to some of the smaller facilities. So they see an opportunity to ratchet down the escaping methanes from the oil and gas facilities. He also talked about satellite data, sharing these data that remote sensing offers to track methane emissions and sharing those data with other nations. So that should help these other countries also get a handle on the methane issue. He interestingly, something I hadn't really expected, and this may be the biggest news included in his speech, SMRs for Ukraine, small modular nuclear reactors for Ukraine.
That is incredible.
I did not see that coming. So I don't know how they're going to do an end-around run on the facilities development or what the timeline is on that, because it's my understanding that the Department of the Army is implementing their first SMR test project out west at the facility. So I didn't realize that they had some ready to go, but maybe they don't. Maybe this is a longer term effort than what's suggested in the announcement. But they talked about SMRs to address hydrogen production and nitrogen fertilizer production. Nitrogen fertilizer production is an energy intensive process. And it's interesting. I actually had some communications with someone on this topic, and I don't think I should discuss it too much, but we had discussed this very subject of nitrogen fertilizer production. Russia produces much of the world's nitrogen fertilizers, and therefore food production, not only direct food exports from Ukraine and Russia are important to global food supplies, but the nitrogen and I think potash fertilizer exports from Russia are essential to food production throughout the world. So this project to use SMRs to produce nitrogen fertilizers in Ukraine seems quite revolutionary in my opinion. He also talked about agriculture in other respects, some of the technological aspects of how technology can be used to bring down carbon emissions and improve overall efficiency of production systems. And interestingly, the Republicans in their talk, which I'll go into more detail later on, raised this same subject. I think a congresswoman from Iowa discussed that. And so on the conservative members, on the Republicans, I'll shift gear over to them now from Biden. This was the first time I had seen Republicans doing a climate talk here at COP, and it was offered by the Conservative Climate Foundation. So it was in the U.S. Center, which means it was approved by the Biden administration. So the Biden administration is at least making an effort to be bipartisan in its approach to the climate crisis in offering this opportunity to them. And it was, I think, four of the representatives from the Republican Party. And the first was Graves from Louisiana. And you, Rock, you may remember him from the select committee meeting that we attended back in April.
Mm-hmm.
this discussion, many of the points raised in this conversation closely paralleled what we witnessed in the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis. And it's very much a back and forth, a punch and counterpunch between the Republicans and Democrats on this issue. And he talked about how the USA has led the world on climate reductions over the past 17 years. And I think that's perhaps a somewhat skewed measure on climate reductions, given that the period we're talking about that many years ago coincided with an economic crash in the United States. And of course, energy consumption and emissions decreased during those recession years.
Absolutely.
So that was somewhat disingenuous, but true. But his priorities for energy, as he articulated them, were one, that energy supplies must be affordable and they must be reliable. And then they should also be clean, but they should also be exportable. And we needed to have secure supply lines, supply chains for whatever energy sources we were relying upon in our own nation. And he also talked about the need for new energy. He said that, economic growth is going to dictate that we need 50% more energy than we're currently producing. So he's of the opinion that the fossil fuels still need to be part of that mix in a big way. And this kind of ties in with the presentation I saw at the Kuwait exhibit, where they were connecting fossil fuel production and combustion for power, and then immediate carbon capture and sequestration at the site of production. So I think Graves was thinking along those lines. And then there was Representative Curtis from Utah, and he spoke, and he was quite proud of the fact that he had created the Conservative Climate Caucus in the U.S. House of Representatives. And he said that it is now the second largest caucus among Republicans. So that's quite significant. So whereas they may not discuss it openly and support the most progressive legislation, it's clear that Republicans in the back of their mind know it's a serious crisis and are thinking about it. But politically, they're still not prepared to take steps and bite the bullet in enacting measures that are required to properly deal with it. And then another representative who you remember from the Select Committee hearing, Crenshaw from Texas, he criticized the use of biofuels as being not very energy effective, and that's true. Biofuels have a place, but often the way they're produced leads to considerable greenhouse gas emissions, and they can be of questionable value. He also criticized the use of Russian fossil fuels, basically saying that the US and other nations were substituting their own energy production with imports from Russia. And of course, the Ukraine war has curtailed much of this, but this is something we've heard him express before in the committee hearings. He also he criticized solar panels because they were produced in China, which is largely reliant on coal power plants. So, we've had some discussions about that, about the break-even point on solar panels, even if they are produced with fossil fuels. At what point they begin to generate emission reductions. But he was talking about better permitting, and I think he, like the other Republicans, were wanting to promote natural gas as a substitute for coal to get that marginal improvement in emissions, and therefore wants to see easier permitting for liquefied natural gas facilities and the pipelines that transmit the natural gas to these locations, to these export locations. And he criticized that the fact that the cost of all of these climate change measures were much higher than the problem warranted. He was basically citing some UN statistics that said that the global GDP would only be impacted by 4% by 2100. I'll have to look that statistic up because that seems awfully low for an impact almost 80 years from now on the climate front. But he was basically downplaying the overall significance of the issue. And then Representative Miller from Iowa talked about the agricultural aspects. She talked about promoting the planting of trees as one way to address the climate crisis, and then talked about precision agriculture and its role in reducing pesticides and fertilizer use. She talked about biochar. She also talked about ethanol. And we all know that ethanol is questionable as far as its energy budget. Now, some of the other discussion talked about Gen 4 nuclear. The Republicans were very supportive of moving this technology forward. So this SMR announcement for Ukraine should have been well received by the Republican delegation. They also talked about how dense energy was very important, and dense energy means the concentration per mass or per article of capital infrastructure. It delivers a high amount of energy. So nuclear power is, of course, the most dense energy from its fuel, and gasoline is quite high. And they closed the session with sort of a softball question from the Citizens Climate Lobby. And CCL has long tried to get Republicans to sign on to their carbon fee and dividend proposal, but they never have. So CCL is still working toward it. And as you may know, the only Republican to have signed on to that actually lost his race. Excuse me. In several years ago, and that was Representative Francis Rooney from Southwest Florida. So they wrapped up the session, but it was good to see the Republicans there making a contribution, even though it just sort of paralleled the debate, the hostile debate that's been going on in the Select Committee for the Climate Crisis over the past couple of years.
I agree. It was very nice to see them in attendance at the event, although I did notice there were some Republicans last year at COP26, although they weren't nearly as strong of a presence as apparently they are this year. I don't think Representative Crenshaw was there last year. I could be mistaken about that. But I am glad to see that they're actually in attendance. Excuse me. So moving on, I think that Pelosi's talk and Biden's talk were really crucial and important to showcase the Democrats and their movement forward, whereas Biden tried to do more of an international wrap up. I'm glad to see that was taking place in the the larger stage. But John, what do you think about Pelosi and her interaction with the Republicans at COP27? So I noticed that a couple of times she did take a couple of pot shots at Republicans over during the conference time. Especially their refusal and their lack of commitments with regard to the climate crisis. I don't think I don't remember her talking very much about their dependence still on fossil fuels. I am glad to see that they are coming around with regard to nuclear, though. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think maybe that's one area where the two sides can agree on nuclear. I'm not sure the general public is on board yet. I think there's going to have to be a lot of education, and there's going to have to be some demonstration projects, because on the international front with Russia and Ukraine, we've seen how nuclear facilities can be put at risk. So that's going to be a difficult one to overcome. But I don't think there's any reason for Pelosi to hide the fact that they've been battling on climate forever. I mean, right there at University of Florida, you have a Republican senator nominated to be the new president of the university. And the League of Conservation Voters rated Senator Sass on his climate voting record. And out of, I think it was 56 separate climate bills or climate related actions, he voted the way the League of Conservation Voters advised, only one time out of those 56. So there's a solid foundation for debate and controversy between the parties on this issue. I guess what we need to do is make sure that the Republicans keep supporting the private sector initiatives once it becomes profitable in certain areas, and that the Democrats continue to support the regulatory needs and the public sector investments on addressing the climate crisis.
Absolutely, absolutely. Helen makes a really interesting comment. Hope there are discussions about the livestock industry and its effect in the climate change and population health. Definitely stick around, Helen. I'll talk a little bit maybe in the future about my own research and subjects and subject material, especially as COP27 does plan on tackling agriculture, I think sometime next week. So we'll definitely get more in depth on that one. As a reminder, you can visit campusclimatecorps.org to go ahead and register for our daily briefings. We're so glad to have each and every one of you here. That being said, John, do you have any final statements, any final observations before we close out here?
Oh, I'm just happy I can breathe right now. I've had a terrible cold the past week. All the stress of getting here and getting set up, and then exposure to so many people. Whereas not many people are wearing masks this year. It doesn't seem that we're having trouble with COVID among the crowd, but your standard colds and such are being widely spread. But we'll get through it.
Hopefully we spread the dream of fighting climate change faster. That being said, thank you all for tuning in to today's daily briefing, our 7th daily briefing. Please tune in tomorrow for our 8th daily briefing. Hopefully have some more content for you as our troops on the ground, Valholly, Esteban, Dr. Capece, and the rest are all getting the content that you deserve and you want to see. If you do have any suggestions, comments, concerns, please feel free to email us. More than happy to go over anything that you see or anything that you'd like us to cover over the next few days. COP27 goes into week 2. So stay tuned, folks. And from Sharm El Sheikh and Gainesville, Florida, we're signing off. See you, folks.
Lately, it seems every passing second brings news of another climate-driven disaster. But we still have the power to turn back the clock. Harnessing the power of collective human energy, today's university students are working together to chart a new future, demanding and creating the solutions for a sustainable climate. Our focus in science, engineering, activism, and politics offers the potential of a better tomorrow for all of us. Tune in to Campus Climate Corps for news of what is and what is not happening at this year's UN Climate Conference. Prepare for a livable tomorrow with a life and career of action. Join us and become part of the solution.